Hey, welcome to Format Podcast. On today's episode, we have on Mr. Lawrence Pope. Lawrence is the Chief Administrative Officer for Halliburton. Halliburton is an oil field services company. They span around 70 countries across the globe. They have around 50,000 employees. And Lawrence, being the Chief Administrative Officer, oversees the HR department, IT, logistics, security, manufacturing, so many of the services that just kind of keep that company going. And he does that across the globe for the company. And so it was just super fascinating to sit down with an oil man like Lawrence and ask all my silly questions. Unfortunately, Forrest was not able to join us on today's episode. So it was just me and Mr. Pope, and we had a great time. I know very little about the oil industry and asked all sorts of, like I like to say, silly questions about it. But we had a good time, and I learned a lot. So quick shout out to our sponsor, Rambler Sparkling Water. Hope you all enjoy. So there's really no rhyme, reason, topic. We had this initially we called it the 1776 podcast.
Yeah,
just because, it was fun. But then we found out that there's also a group of white supremacists going by the name 1776.
Yeah,
and we were like, we should probably change the name. So now it's Format Podcast because our construction company is Format Construction.
Okay,
so
all right.
That's how that came about. But thank you, Lawrence, for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. My pleasure to be here.
So I've had the opportunity of working for you for I don't know how many years.
It's been a long time. It's been a
very long time.
Probably about 2011.
Has it been that long?
Yeah, that's when we moved into that house in Navigation. So when I first met you.
Wow.
So it's been a long time.
It's been a long time. And so folks who don't know, Lawrence and I go way back, obviously. And you had a house out in Travis I took care of for a while. My dad's still taking care of the new one. And you've just always been an interesting person to me because you've obviously been very successful, and I've always liked working with you and have learned a lot. But I know very little about you and how you've gotten to where you are today. And so I'm just curious, kind of just like your backstory, like how did you get to where you were? But before we get to that, I kind of want to cut what are you up to these days? I mean, are you still at Halliburton? Like, what is your day-to-day like these days?
Yeah, still working at Halliburton. Been there now, next year will be 35 years.
You've been there 35 years?
35. Graduated from Texas in 90 and then went straight to work for Halliburton. Well, one of the subsidiaries of Halliburton, and have been there ever since. Wow.
So what is your role as of today?
So basically what I do is I'm the Chief Administrative Officer of the company. So Halliburton, as you know, oil field services company, large company, 70 different countries around the world. Wow. We got about 50,000 employees all over the world. And what I do is I'm in charge of all of the functions that enable the business. So IT, procurement, materials, logistics, 17 manufacturing facilities, the HR functions, security functions. So all the kind of the supporting functions that help run the business.
They rope the HR into that department?
They rope HR into that
sounds like a headache.
As well. Yeah, that's job security right there.
I was going to say, that's got to be either job security or a thorn in your side, probably a little bit of both.
A little bit of both sometimes.
Well, cool. And so, I mean, where are you from? Like, where were you born? How did you end up? I know you went to UT, but what was your life like getting to UT?
So actually, it's kind of a surprising story. So I'm American now, but I was actually born in England. So I was British originally. My mother's British. My father was from Chile, and then he moved to England as well, and he got his British citizenship. And
how old was he when he moved to England?
I'm trying to remember. I think probably about 20, 21 time frame, because he moved from Chile to Argentina and then moved over to Spain and then to England. And so I was born in England, British passport, always considered myself English initially, and my dad was in the engineering construction business, so I moved around the world, basically every 2 or 3 years, moved to different places. So I lived in, Holland, Sicily, Romania, Algeria.
So mostly
Abu
Europe.
Dhabi, yeah.
No, Abu Dhabi, I guess that was
so Middle East and North Africa as well. And then when I was about 16, my parents moved over to the U.S. because the company was headquartered out of the U.S. And so I moved over then when I was 16 and been here ever since, based in Houston. and then I got my American citizenship. So now I can, proud American now.
There you go. Do you still have a lot of family in the UK, or is mostly
I
everyone
don't.
over?
No, I mean, other than my mother and my father both live actually in Kingwood in Houston.
Okay.
And basically all my relatives from the UK have passed on now, the older relatives. So no, we're really a U.S.-based family now, is what I'll say.
Wow. So as a young man living all over the country, are there any that you really particularly enjoyed living in?
I actually enjoyed every place for different reasons. Just different exposure to cultures. I think it helped me growing up, getting better exposure to different cultures around the world, and realizing that there is a big wide world out there aside from the United States. And I think it gave me a different perspective on things.
How many years would you typically spend in each country? It was like a year or two, and then you were moving
it's
again?
like 2 to 3 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's like a military lifestyle almost.
Yeah, it's exactly what it was like. Just, he'd go in, build a big refinery, and then commission it, and then we'd move on to somewhere else.
So was your dad in the oil business too?
No, he was in the downstream, so engineering, construction. So I'm in the upstream business. So we're basically helping the companies we support, like the big super majors. We help them extract the hydrocarbons from subsurface, so we get them to the surface. Then they're typically piped to a refinery, and then the refineries does the processing. That's what they call the downstream. So he was on the downstream side.
Okay,
so
so
he was building the refineries.
Interesting. So the upstream, I know very little oil lingo, and so the upstream would be literally sucking the oil out of the ground, the process to do that, and then downstream is refining it.
Yeah, there's really 4 sectors. So there's upstream, which is what I'm in, and so you basically have companies like Exxon and Shell and Chevron, the big companies, and they will own the assets, or they'll own the reservoirs.
And so the assets would be like land rights or mineral rights, or actually owning the land and the mineral rights themselves, or
sometimes both, but typically the mineral rights.
Okay.
So then what they'll do is they'll call in a company like Halliburton. We will drill the well and produce the well.
So Exxon is hiring Halliburton to come in and actually extract the oil.
To extract the oil, yes. And then we get it to the surface, and then basically you have midstream, which is basically your pipeline infrastructure. That will carry it to a refinery. The refinery does the processing. That's called the downstream. And then the downstream coming out of the refinery, getting into the gas station, that's called your distribution. So it's really those big 4 segments of the business.
And so what segments does Halliburton have their hands in on that?
Upstream.
Just the upstream?
Just the upstream,
Okay.
yes.
I mean, it's become such a huge company. I'm kind of just curious, why not try to get more involved in other aspects? Or is it just a win-win? There's a good synergy to kind of stay in your lane, they stay in theirs? Or?
Well, we're a public company, and typically Wall Street likes what they call pure play companies that focus on one particular sector. There was a time actually where we owned, and where I actually started in the business was on the downstream in the engineering construction side. So Halliburton owned a downstream company, or downstream engineering construction, which was KBR, Keller Brown and Root. And but over time, Wall Street really prefers kind of stay in your niche, and so we decided to divest KBR and stay in the oil field side.
How interesting. Okay, take us back to Lawrence Pope at 16. You moved to Houston.
Yeah.
How'd you end up going to UT?
Major culture shock. So I moved when I was 16. And 16 in England is the equivalent of graduating from high school in the United States.
Oh, interesting.
So I was like 2 years ahead. The problem, though, is in order to go to university, you had to have some prerequisites of American government, U.S. history. So I ended up going to a JUCO in Houston, and then from there I went to UT basically, and studied economics at Texas. Graduated, and as I said, in '90. Went to work in the recruiting area, stayed out of college, and so started off in human resources.
Okay.
And then I've just progressed ever since then.
So how do you end up an oil man? I mean, did you have that thought, as a young man,
Nope.
or do you even consider yourself an oil man? I mean, or is it
Oh,
more?
no, I consider myself an oil man.
I figured you would.
There's no question about that.
Okay.
Once it gets in your blood, it's in your blood.
Yeah.
But, no, it was the right opportunity, right time, great blue chip company, and provided lots of opportunities. And I've really enjoyed there. And in the end, for me, it's all about kind of finding a company whose culture aligns with your own personal values. When I talk to students, I tell them the same thing. And Halliburton's just been a really good fit for me. Just no matter how big we get, it's really very much a family-oriented culture in Halliburton, and a lot of things that I value the same.
So what was your first job at Halliburton?
So I worked in recruiting, and this is kind of a funny story I always tell the students because they always ask me about, well, where did you start off type thing. So my first job at Halliburton was when I graduated, economics degree, University of Texas, came to work thinking I was, going to be made a vice president the next week and for my first year, I actually worked in what we called our craft employment building, which is where we hired a lot of the craft employees, like the pipe fitters and the welders and so on, that would build the refineries.
And those are called craft employees?
Craft employees, yeah. And so basically for the first year, my responsibility was to do drug testing on the employees. So I had to escort the crafts employees into the restroom and give them the cups and then take the samples and test it in the drug machines to make sure that they were eligible for employment. So
I'm sure that's
what I did for the first year.
I'm sure that's a fun group of guys too to say, "Hey, come with me,"
Yeah, it was an interesting experience. But in retrospect, looking back, you always look at different experiences and what you get out of those experiences, and it was an incredibly valuable experience because notwithstanding what I was actually doing, but I did get to talk to the hands, as we call them, the hands that were out in the field making the money every day, and gives you a real perspective on what's important to employees. That later on, as I became a manager and a leader, never forgetting, okay, we're here to serve them and help them succeed because they're the ones making the money for the company and the shareholders.
I mean, hindsight's always 20/20, but how'd you feel about it when you were there actively?
I couldn't wait to get out of there. So when I finally got promoted after that first year, it was quite a monumental time for me.
Yeah. So what was the next step? So from drug testing all the hands to what was your next progression?
Then I just basically progressed in human resources. I did various specialties. I worked in there's a specialty in compensation where you look at how you pay your employees, and then there's a specialty in HR systems and how we record employee information and extract data and everything. And then eventually I went down to be an HR manager on a refinery that we were building, a cogen facility actually down in Sulphur, Louisiana. And so then I kind of had responsibility for all of human resources there. And then just progressed to different things through the organization. And then at some point in time within the organization, they asked me to go get an MBA. So,
interesting.
So I continued working, and they helped sponsor me, which I really appreciated.
How old were you at that time?
So I think I was about 30 at that point.
And they asked you to go back at that time?
Yeah. So, but it was going. I went to Rice and I got the professional or the executive MBA. So it was work during the week and then go to school on the weekends. And then after coming out and getting an MBA, then they moved me out of human resources and put me into finance. So I ran finance, one of our division's finance functions for a while, and then did that. And then coming off that, they decided, as I mentioned earlier, that they wanted to split off our downstream company. And since I had originally started there, they asked me to go back in there and help spin it off. So I did that.
So was the mission there to build that up and to a point where you could sell it off?
Yes.
Maximize the profit as you
you're
exit?
trying to get that's exactly what I did. And that was one of the toughest jobs I ever had because it was myself and another Halliburton employee, and we had to go in there and basically right-size the organization and cost manage the organization to get it to the point where it was really attractive for a split off. We were successful in doing that, and it's still now a publicly traded corporation out there.
That's gotta feel good.
Yeah. So, and then after I finished that, I got asked to come back into Halliburton and as the head of HR for the company, and then since then they've just added different things to my portfolio.
Wow, how interesting! I mean, so you've really kind of a shining example of climbing the corporate ladder through the company there. It's really neat.
Yeah, it's been good. It's been a great experience.
How would you decide or know, how did those progressions happen going from one role to another? I mean, is that something that they would come to you? Would you kind of have to be the squeaky wheel? I mean, how did that work
No,
as you went
I was
through?
fortunate enough that just naturally occurred where I was asked to take on more things, and I just think a takeaway. I teach a lot on leadership, ironically at A&M, being a UT grad, I teach in their master's program, and I talk to their students as well. And what I always tell them, if you want, don't be focused on your next job. Be focused on doing an excellent job in the job that you're in, because if you do an excellent job at the job you're in, it'll be recognized and you'll get promoted into the next job. So that's what happened to me, I think.
Wow. How cool. Tell me about this A&M teaching gig. I didn't realize you were doing that. How long have you been doing that?
Yeah, I started doing that. Well, we do a lot of our own internal leadership development training at Halliburton in partnership with A&M. So I'm always up talking to our management that we're putting through our leadership programs. But about 4 years ago, I got asked to go in and actually teach there. They have a master's program for human resource professionals. And so I got asked to go in and teach the finance component of that because I know finance and I also know HR. So it was trying to teach HR people how to think like financial professionals and what type of decisions you make as a finance professional, knowing human resources. And so I started that about 4 years ago, and that's been fun as well.
Oh, cool. Are you going in to teach a class, or how does that work?
Yeah, and so I'll go in. It's usually they alternate. It's usually either during the fall or the spring semester. They do it in City Center in Houston.
Oh, so it's in Houston. That's great.
And so I'll go in there on once a week when it's going on, and I'll talk to the class. And usually what I do is I partner with one of the A&M faculty, and so they're teaching the pure academia, and I'll teach them, okay, so now you've learned the theory. Now let me tell you how it works in the real world and how you apply it in the real world. So it's turned out to be really a good experience.
Wow, how cool. How did that come about? Was it how did that start? Was it through Halliburton?
It was actually getting to know the Mays Business School, because that's where we do all of the Halliburton stuff, leadership with. I got to know the faculty really well there and the deans, and they invited me to come in and start doing this. And so initially it was kind of, it was kind of pro bono, and then after a while they said, come on in and we'll make you an adjunct professor type, and you can teach our students.
Yeah. So being in HR at the level you are, I mean, I'm sure you're not dealing with like the one-off, like, oh, Susie called me a B word or whatever. But what does HR look like at your level? I mean, when you're at the top of HR, what does that look like on a day-to-day level?
Yeah, I mean, I'm fortunate enough that I have a team below me. So I mentioned the functions I was running before. So I have a vice president of human resources that's part of my team. And she does an excellent job in leading the day-to-day activities. So a lot of things that I deal with are going to be the most senior level professionals within the organization, interacting with our board of directors, because there's a lot of corporate governance matters associated with human resources, paying the CEO, paying the executive officers, the external disclosures, et cetera. And then also dealing with our shareholders. So we do shareholder engagement with our largest shareholders, and they want to talk to me and a couple of other people about different things about how we run the company. So that's what I mainly deal with. And HR has actually become a smaller component of my portfolio now because I have a great head of HR.
What do you think is the hardest part about your job as of today?
It really varies by function. I often get asked the question, what keeps me awake at night?
Probably a lot at that level.
Yeah, I mean, HR, it's are we hiring the right people? Do we have enough people in the right place? Are they trained and competent to do the job? I mean, oilfield service is a particularly demanding career, and it's a dangerous career as well. And so making sure people are properly trained and have the competency to do the work that they're doing. Making sure we're getting a return on what we're investing in people. I mean, people in our business is about a third of our cost structure, so it's a big investment. So making sure that happens on an ongoing basis is important. And then other areas in procurement, it's do we have the right materials on location at the right time to be able to frack a well, or and then in IT, what keeps me awake there is cybersecurity attacks, and so it varies based on each function.
Oh, interesting. So with you, overseeing 50,000 employees, or I guess, do you? I mean, are you worldwide looking at everyone hiring? Are you focused on the U.S., a certain region, or?
No, I've got the globe. So, and then the way we're organized. So I have region HR leads that take care of the various regions that we're in, and product service line leaders as well that take care of our product service lines. So my job is more managing what they're doing and overseeing what they're doing. Trust and verify is what I call it. So,
how of the 50,000-ish employees, how many of those are based in the U.S.?
Right now, we're I would say about 45% are in the U.S., and the rest are all over the world.
How does it change from country to country? I'm sure the laws vary, how you hire people vary.
Every country has its own set of labor laws, distinct set of labor laws. So, like I said, you just have to have the right team in place that helps you manage that.
What country comes across your desk and you're like, oh no, I don't want to go build in this country?
I think every country has its different nuances. You know, it's I don't want to pick out one particular country as being more challenging than others. There are. I mean, the U.S. is particularly challenged.
That's what I was kind of thinking. It's probably the U.S. or maybe Canada or some of these countries I could see probably being pretty difficult.
Yeah, they just have different issues. I mean, so Western Europe, it's different labor laws and different work hours. You go to Norway, for example, the schedules that have to be worked there, particularly with offshore workers, those are the things we have to work carefully. And then you get into Africa, and it's, the people we're hiring, making sure they're competent to do the job. So, I mean, everyone has different nuances.
That's got to be so interesting, though. I feel
it's pretty cool. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
How often do you have to travel? I mean, are you going around the world quite a bit?
I have in the past. Recently, I haven't been traveling too much because we've had a bunch of different things going on at corporate that's kept me. But, I was just in Panama a few weeks ago. I'll be in Saudi here coming up in February. So it's just Singapore, as we have 3 big manufacturing centers in Singapore, so I travel there. India, we do a lot of our outsourcing of our back office of IT to India, so I was in Bangalore and Hyderabad here not too long ago. So, yeah, I get around.
I'm curious, in the Middle East, like Saudi Arabia, I mean, you always hear they have so much oil and they're building all these cities and have all this oil money. Are they hiring Halliburton to come in? Like, how does that structure work over there? Are they hiring y'all to come in and do
it's very similar. So, I mean, if you think about, I mentioned earlier, you look at who we serve. So we serve the oil companies. And oil companies, basically, I'll narrow it down to really 3 types of oil companies. There's what they call the national oil companies. So these are companies that are they're basically owned by the government of the particular country. So in Saudi Arabia, the biggest, and it's actually probably the biggest company in the world, is a company called Saudi Aramco. And so Aramco is a government oil company and fabulous customer. So they hire us to come in and do exactly what we do for the companies like Exxon and Shell. So NOCs is what they call national oil companies. So Aramco, Sonatrach, PDVSA, those type of companies. Pemex in Mexico, all those type of companies. And then you have the super majors, the Exxons, the Shells, the Chevrons, et cetera.
And those are all publicly traded companies.
Publicly traded.
Yeah.
And then you have what's called independent companies. So those are similar, but they're smaller than the super majors.
Okay. And the independent ones, are they also publicly traded, or are they independent?
In some cases they are. Some of them are. Most of them are, but some of them will be privately held as well.
Is there a certain level that you have to become publicly traded? Like if you
No.
Okay.
No, you don't. Now, eventually you'll get large enough that you're going to need access to capital to continue to invest in the business. And so one of the best ways to get capital for an organization is to do an IPO and raise funds through stock.
Let's go public and sell off a share and get a bunch of money. How interesting. What's the latest in West Texas? I mean, I know years ago there's this crazy boom. People are renting their driveways overnight for workers. And what's the
Permian? The Permian is still
kicking.
It's still kicking.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the Permian is producing like Well, the U.S. right now is producing about 13.2 million barrels of oil equivalent per day.
Wait, 13.2 million barrels a day.
A day. So the whole world right now is producing and consuming just over 100 million barrels of oil per day. So about 102 million barrels of oil per day. And the U.S. is accountable for about 13 million of that. And then you have the OPEC companies like a Saudi Aramco and so on. They're the biggest contributors, really.
Wow. That is just the oil business never ceases to amaze me, just how large it is and the numbers that goes through. How long do they think that we'll be pumping out of the Permian Basin?
For the foreseeable future.
There's no like, oh no, we're running low scares out there?
No, there's no. I mean, really, the amount that we produce is really, the whole issue is related to supply and demand. And so, there's a lot of negative noise about oil prices, et cetera, but the reality is the oil companies don't control oil prices. I mean, it's become a pure economic play, the supply of oil versus the demand of oil. And that's why you'll see cyclicality in the business because, at some point in time, the business is producing 102 million barrels of oil equivalent a day, and demand declines because the Chinese economy or the Indian economy or the U.S. is in a recession. The consumption of oil from the users of it goes down. So now you've got an imbalance between demand and supply, so prices will go down. Conversely, if economies are humming like a China or an India in particular, then you get real stress on oil prices, or you get a geopolitical issue in the Middle East, for example. You get a stress on oil prices, and oil prices will go up, and consequently the price of the pump will go up. But it's all dependent upon supply and demand.
How much do you pay attention to all of that? I mean, is that something you're hyper focused on?
We're hyper focused on it because it trickles down. Oil and the macro supply and demand, that affects how much the oil companies are willing to invest. And if they reduce their investment, then the service companies, their business reduces. And if they want to produce more wells, then our business increases. So we're very tied into supply and demand of oil.
And so, I know you've had these wells drilled for years and years, but as the cycle kind of ebbs and flows, are you just turning off wells and turning them back on, or are you actually going and saying, oh, it's hot right now, let's put in a bunch more wells? Or how often? I mean, 'cause it seems like those are difficult to drill and takes time. I feel like it'd be hard to.
Yeah, well, what happens is when you drill a well, you're basically producing the well, and then there's something called decline curves. Because when you produce a well, it starts with initial decline rate, and over time, the decline, the wells start to decline in production, and that's when you have to constantly be looking for new wells to drill.
Oh, I see.
So you're always trying to work off that curve. Wells can produce for a long time if they're treated properly. But even when you produce a well, there's a misconception that, let's say we find a reservoir, or the companies find a reservoir, they call us in to drill it and produce it. You don't get all the hydrocarbons out. I mean, essentially, a good recovery rate right now is probably between 30 and 40% of the capacity of that reservoir.
So I'm just to make sure I understand. So of the capacity of a reservoir, if you're able to pump out 30 to 40% of that, that's a big win.
That's you're doing pretty well.
Okay.
And one of the big focus areas is on what they call enhanced oil recovery now, and how do you get more production out of that well than the typical 30 to 40% recovery rate.
What's capping you at that 30 to 40%? I mean, in my head, I just imagine like a big underground lake of oil and you stick a straw in it, which is obviously wrong. So correct me. I'm sure it's like an aquifer where there's pockets all over, and then as you pump it, it kind of sucks it down. It takes time to recover. I mean, is that what's going on with the oil?
Yeah, essentially what you're doing is so if you look at the structure, a reservoir is not a big hole in the ground full of hydrocarbons. It's typically porous rock, and this is in the U.S. in particular. This is where this big shale play came into effect. Some technology that was developed, some fracking technology.
Yeah, so we'll be able to go sideways and find all these.
So we
pockets.
run laterals and into the producing zone, and then what you do is you basically pump water and sand, essentially, in the simplest form, down and fracture the rock. And that pressure creates flow and produces the well. So think about if you got a piece of rock and you looked at it, you'd be like, okay, this is solid, but in actual fact, it's porous, and that's where the hydrocarbons are stored within there.
Oh, interesting. I know fracking had a bunch of fuss when it first started kind of coming online. I'm sure it's been around a long time, but I've always been curious of this. Now that you're stuck having to talk to me, I'm going to ask. But if you're drilling sideways, do you have to stay within, like, let's say you own a 1 acre square and you drill straight down. Can you go outside of your 1 acre sideways to drill, or do you have to stay, straight down?
Typically, so what they'll do is they'll have leases, and that'll define the boundaries of the lease. And you typically will have to stay within that lease, okay, or within that acreage, as they call it. But what you can do is people think of a well as you drill, you got a rig and you drill straight down. Well, you actually don't. So what you'll typically do is you will drill down 8,000-9,000 feet, and then you will turn the drill bit and go lateral for maybe another 15,000-20,000 feet under the ground on a lateral basis. And then not only that, they have what they call multilaterals. So what you need to think about is you've got this straw coming down, for lack of a better term, from the rig, and then you've got all these fingers that go out from the wellbore. And that's why they call them multilaterals. And some of these wells now are pretty prolific. We just drilled one 3 months ago in the Middle East, and it was 52,000 feet.
52,000 feet.
So you think about size of Mount Everest, almost twice the size of Mount Everest. And that's how far you're drilling.
How do these drills, I might be getting too technical, but like I envision, a straw hole, maybe 8-inch, 12-inch, I don't know, going down, and you get 9,000 feet down. How do you turn a drill bit? Like, how does that?
They call it directional drilling.
Yeah.
So you think about, let's use the analog of a straw.
Okay.
Right? And you've got a straw, and you've got a single straw, and you put it in, and you try to bend it. You're going to kink it, right? But if you, like when we were kids, used to stick lots of straws together, it starts to bend, right? And so what you're thinking about here is you've got the drill pipe with the drill bit at the end, and you're drilling so many thousands of feet that you're gradually bending and turning the drill string underground.
And so if you're doing one of the multi ones, are you using one hole and then you're
they're using one hole, and then you'll go down like 8,000 feet, and then you'll have multiple fingers that'll come off in different directions. So it's a good way of surface. You're only basically affecting one pad, but you're able to penetrate lots of different directions under the surface. And the drilling sophistication now is, you have to think about a pay zone. A pay zone may be, what's this roof here, about 8 feet, 10 feet? Okay, so think about a pay zone 10,000 feet under the ground that is 10 feet tall. So you've got to drill 8,000 feet down, then turn the drill bit and be able to penetrate right through the middle of this of a pay zone that's 8 to 10 feet high. And that's the degree of sophistication and technology that's required to do that.
What's the technology that they're able to look through the earth? Is it some sort of LiDAR?
Yeah, they have. It's seismic, and then there's also you run what they call wireline, where you're basically putting tools down hole that'll shoot. It's kind of pictures of the earth. But now, even with the latest technology, like some of our tools in our rotary steerables, the actual drill bit and the drill string, as it's drilling, is looking ahead and looking to the side, 200 feet out from the wellbore, shooting images. And it's not like taking a picture. It's basically using technology to see what does it look like out there under the subsurface.
I'm sure it's some sort of density monitor. It's just picking up on how dense
it's basically shooting electrons and so on out and seeing how it bounces back.
Wow, how interesting. Have we discovered all of the oil on Earth? I mean, do we pretty much know where it all is these days? We're still finding it.
No, we're still finding it all the time. You'll hear big announcements of they've, just discovered a reserve that they think has 1 billion barrels of oil in it. So it's getting more and more challenging to get it, though. And a lot of the big plays, the elephants as they call them, are offshore, deep water. So now you're not only drilling on land, but now you've got to get a rig, take it out into the deep water, and then you've got to go through 8,000 feet of water, then get to the seabed floor, then drill below that, and then take your laterals out from that, and then put all the equipment that you need to protect the well, et cetera.
So let's just say, for example, Exxon's like, hey, we found some oil out here in the ocean. We need to do a deep water well. Who's funding the cost of actually building all that equipment to pump it out? Is that Halliburton saying coming in under contract they have it, or like someone's taking a risk there, hoping that there's actually enough oil below the surface to put in the infrastructure?
That's the customer. We don't take the risk as to whether we don't take the risk as to whether there's actually hydrocarbons there. We will look at their well design and help them get it out. And then we have to invest. They have to invest. Well, I mean, they're paying companies, so they're paying for a rig. So a rig today, and they don't pay us. There's other companies that do rig. That could be $500,000-$600,000 a day to have one of those rigs out in the Gulf of Mexico, for example. Then they'll hire us to come out on the rig and put our equipment to actually drill off that rig to go subsurface. So we have to invest in technology, but we get paid for that. So and it's all about getting an adequate return on your investment.
So you guys are actually in a pretty unique spot. Seems like a good place to be, where they're kind of footing the bill. You guys come in and get to do the equipment, do the labor in a sense of actually getting it out, but you have less risk, it seems like, than like
Exxon. We have less risk other than like I said earlier, it's a very complex, challenging business, can be dangerous. There's lots of standards we have to follow. The risk of whether it's actually a producing pay zone belongs to the customer, but if we do something on that when we're drilling that well that is not within standard, then we bear some risk on that too.
And I'm sure it's probably scary too, just like the disasters that have happened with oil spills and whatnot. And I guess you guys are kind of caught on a lot of those, or having to, that's where your liability is, I guess, would be helping try to prevent that. Yeah, that's stressful.
Yes, very.
How interesting. Is there anything about the oil industry you just wish people knew more, or knew? Is there?
I think that look, the oil industry gets a lot of negative press in terms of contribution to global warming, et cetera. I think there's what I've described to students has helped them understand is if you think about the 7 billion people on this planet, approximately.
Yeah, that's what we think.
That's what we think.
Yeah.
There's about 1 billion people that have access to clean, affordable energy. And so you think about you or me or average American or the average Western European, we take it for granted that we can go to the gas station, fill up a car, we can turn on the lights regularly, we can have Wi-Fi regularly. A lot of the clothes that we wear contain hydrocarbons in them, et cetera. We consume on average about 40 barrels of oil equivalent per year.
Each person does.
Each person does. And if you think about a barrel of oil equivalent, every barrel of oil is equivalent to 42 gallons. Okay, so you can do the math there. So about 1 billion people are consuming about 40 barrels of oil equivalent a day. There's 6 billion people who don't have the privilege of being able to turn on the lights whenever they want and get heating and get pure water, et cetera. They consume on average about 4 barrels of oil equivalent per year. So, yes, there's a lot of negative sentiment, but the reality of it is the contribution that the oil and gas industry makes to the betterment of society as a whole is not truly appreciated. And all you have to do is travel to some of the remote locations in India and China and Africa and realize, there's a trade-off here in terms of how do we get people affordable energy to make their life better. There's actually a few good books. There's a great book called The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels by Alex Epstein that kind of lays out the positive correlation between consumption of energy and longevity of life, infant mortality, et cetera. I mean, just things like you never think about is emergency services here in the United States. Well, I don't know many fire engines or many ambulances that run on wind power. And hospitals, yes, okay, they run on electricity, but where does that electricity come from? And so it's a very complex question. Now, on our side, we strive to do a much, really focus all the time on how do we improve the environment, how are we good stewards of the environment, how do we reduce our emissions. But in the end, we're contributing to the betterment of society, and that's what I think people should know more about. And without oil and gas, people, I always go into a class and I hold up my iPhone and said, okay, you don't want oil and gas. How many of you are willing to give up your iPhone? Because this product has got oil and gas throughout it. I mean, how many of you will do without your makeup? How many will do without turning on your hairdryer in the morning? And, all those basic things that people take for granted and don't truly appreciate how much oil and gas is contributing to those products.
I've always had kind of a hard time with the pushback that people have had. I think oil and gas is kind of like an easy one to kind of paint into a corner and make it black and white, which is very not. But I mean, as a home builder, it's like, do I want to cut down trees? No, but you need to cut down a tree to build a house. And I think there's a trade-off there that people struggle with, or it's like I feel like a lot of the times the loudest voices are like, don't save the trees, and they're screaming that from a house built of wood. It's like, well, come on now, you have to break a few eggs to make an omelet. And I think oil and gas is a big one that there's been a lot of bad flack, but then there are oil spills and things that happen. And it comes with it. And I think just trying to, like you see, be the best stewards you can, while also realizing this is kind of a necessary evil in a sense. That's but like it's life. I mean, things you have to extract these things to make it work. Like California, not that long ago, they were saying by 2025 we're going to have all electric vehicles, and then like the same day they were like, don't plug in your electric vehicles, we're having brownouts, because like the whole industry can't actually support going all electric. And then for a while, wind turbines were the new rave, and now we're finding out they're killing all the birds and the bats, and all these butterflies coming up through the migration patterns in South Texas are just getting murdered by all of these wind turbines, and there's no real way to dispose of them. And then solar is a huge mess. I mean, I had a guy on the podcast that was hired as like an environmental scientist, I forgot exactly his term, by BP in South Texas, and they were putting in solar on this farm that had all of these endangered turtles on the ranch and all this really rare cactus. And his job was to go down there literally in front of the bulldozers. They'd have like 10 bulldozers wide, and there was a crew of environmental scientists looking for these turtles. And as they were walking, they were looking for these turtles. So they were just clear cutting thousands of acres to come put in solar farms. So it's like that's all. It's like there's no clean way of doing it.
There's no easy answer to do it. No. And the reality is, it's got to be just like anything else. It's got to be a collaboration or cooperation of all these different solutions working together. I think right now, of the world's energy, about 8 to 10% is produced by what they call clean energy, wind or solar or ocean power or whatever, and the rest is produced by oil and gas. Well, you're not going to get. It's going to take time for that to occur. But yeah, you used the example of California. I mean, I just think back not too recently. It's the issue that we had in Houston when during the really cold winter, when all of a sudden the power went down there and everybody was screaming about not enough power. But that's what people. When I talked to earlier about the 6 billion people, they deal with that day in, day out. So their priority is getting reliable, cheap energy. And if you think about the trade-offs they're willing to make, that may be a little bit different than the trade-offs that we're willing to make in the United States. So it's an evolving challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think there's anybody that wouldn't want, air quotes, clean energy. I question how clean energy even is because of a variety of reasons. But, the oil and gas industry is so large and so far ahead of everything else. It's, in my opinion, we should leave that as it is and then also work on other solutions at the same time. But I mean, I'd much rather have a well in West Texas and some wind farms in South Texas, so that's very much how I feel with it.
I'm glad to hear that.
Well, what else, Lawrence? What did we miss? What else do we need to talk about?
I think we've talked about quite a bit. So,
yeah.
So you tell me about you. What are you doing nowadays?
Well, these days I started a home building company coming on about 2 years ago. Yeah. So we're doing remodels. We actually just landed a church in Leander we're going to build.
Oh, great.
First commercial project for us. And then Forrest, my co-host and business partner, owns the pool building company we've been working on together. And fortunately, he wasn't able to be here today, but we've got a whole handful of big custom pools under construction and a bunch more that we're remodeling. And yeah, just staying busy. We've got a big remodel next to Barton Springs right now. We got a house down to the studs. I mean, we've got this entire thing, and that one's going well. We're building the pool out the back, and so yeah, just trying to stay busy.
It's keeping you busy, huh?
Yeah.
And you were traveling much? I know I remember you told me you went to Iceland not too long ago. That must have been an interesting experience.
That was really, really cool. Iceland was amazing, and then went over to Denmark for a few days and came back. And yeah, it's. I need another one. I've been busy. Life gets in the way, but I haven't been traveling too much here in the last couple of years. Honestly, I've just been busy trying to build the business and little weekend trips here and there, but nothing too crazy.
Well, good for you. Well, no, this has been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on, and I really appreciate it. It was really fun. I've never been able to sit down with an oil man like that and ask all my silly questions. That was fun.
Well, it's my pleasure to be here.
Cool. Thank you, Lawrence.
Thanks.